if it turns out that this goes the way that the administration is wanting it to go, which means they're going to renegotiate, this could be a huge thing for us.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello and welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we take a look at what is changing in the pest and lawn industries, and we take you to the front lines for those that are driving those changes. I'm Donnie Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. And with me is Florida's favorite resident, might I add, Mr. Dan Gordon. Dan, would you like to say good morning? Talk about our sponsors, of course.
Yep.
This very special topic that we got, very timely topic, and then I guess the guest as well.
Sure. So good morning, Dan Gordon, PCO Bookkeepers, M&A Specialists. We do CFO work for pest and lawn companies as well as exit planning. Our sponsors are, if you're interested in marketing for the pest or lawn industry, it's Coalmarch, and that's coalmarch.com. Interested in insurance for the pest industry, that would be pestsure.com. And new for this year is Voice for Pest, designing and implementing unparalleled voice solutions for PMPs of any size, coast to coast. Visit them at voiceforpest.com/podcast. And if you're interested in joining a peer group, which has become very, very popular, please visit us at pmpindustryinsider.com/peer groups, and also go back to episode 136 for more information. And before I give you the title of today's topic, I just want to get a little nostalgic with you. The way that this podcast began was in a crazy world. It wasn't geopolitical, although maybe you could, depending on what your
I was going to say, depending on who you talk to, it could have been.
Depends on who you talk to. But if you remember, we decided that during COVID, when the whole thing first started, we were like, oh shoot, we're out of business. What should we do? I don't know. Let's do a webinar. Maybe we could get 10 or 15 people on it. And we did that webinar, and we got over 1,000 people, and people were knocked out and everything else. And that was the beginning of our podcasts. And that was what, 4 years ago? So 3 years ago.
No, it's 2025. COVID happened in 2020.
Yeah, so you do the math.
There you go.
Not enough.
Hey, one thing before you move on, though, one thing I want to mention is just, I don't know if everyone caught it on the episode here, but Dan said Coalmarch and then moved on, which is some kind of big news here, which is Coalmarch is now independent. And so if you've not heard the news, it's up on their website. They are an independent now, and of course still a sponsor, of which we are very grateful for. But it is some news nonetheless that if you haven't heard, take a look at coalmarch.com. They got a big old announcement about it. So going back to how this podcast started, yeah, I mean, listen, I remember doing those episodes. I remember we had Gene on. We had so many folks on just giving different insights. And here we are again.
So major geopolitical event, and that is the tariffs. And it's interesting. So we wanted to push this episode out really quickly because things are changing. It's funny so we are recording this on Monday. And
April 7th.
April 7th, where the stock market was set up for a Black Monday. If you looked at the futures in the middle of the night or real early, they were way down. And
1,600 points they were down over the weekend.
Yep. And then what happened was, I guess right around 10 o'clock, Trump administration said, well, maybe we could pause this thing for 90 days, except China. And the markets just ripped, right? But so does that mean, we can go into all of the market trends, and I believe that you don't want to be day trading this market because it's up and down. It's crazy. But that said, how will this whole thing shake out, assuming that we, that the administration means what they say and says what they mean, and that this is the new reality? And I don't want to get political about it, but I want to get what are some of the consequences that you're going to feel, and how do we deal with them? It's very difficult for Donnie to talk without getting political about it because
I'm such a political person. Yes,
he's so political, and he's such a lefty.
Let me just tell you, it's funny because Dan was we were doing our weekly meeting, and we were just in awe as we were doing our weekly meeting. We were literally laughing at how fast and how wild the market was swinging based on this. And so, in any case, the topic is tariff proof your business, what to do right now. And it's really important. And, for now, there's a lot of change. There's obviously these tariffs have been announced. The market's kind of all over the place. And there will absolutely be consequences for our industry, some of which will be quick and fast, and some of which may take a little bit of time. But let's just start from the beginning. Let's first of all talk a little bit about what happened, right? So last week, the Trump administration announced, sweeping tariffs, right? And he announced a baseline tariff of 10% on almost all imports into the U.S., and that was effective April 5th. However, this is the part that's going to have an effect on us, I believe. He also announced higher reciprocal tariffs. So, where there's countries that have large trade surpluses with the U.S., there's another second tariff that's supposed to kick in on April 9th, which is 2 days from now. And of course, this could all change by the time this airs. We're going to try to air it tomorrow. But these reciprocal tariffs are quite significant, right? So when you look at China, China's 34%, India's 26%, Japan's 24%, South Korea's 25%. What's interesting, and again, I can keep going on and on, is that it didn't really matter if they were friend or foe. It had everything to do with what the administration perceived as a trade imbalance, right? So for example, in the case of China, they got a really massive tariff, but Japan, who's an ally, also got they got 24%. And so we made a huge outline for this episode, if you can believe that. And we're gonna put up our sources and kind of some of the links that we're going to be talking about in this episode. But essentially, when we look at what happened, is that there's a whole new approach to how trade's going to work in the United States and how we're going to trade with other countries. And this has big impacts because there are massive trade deficits that we have, and there is an imbalance. And before this all shakes out, like if you think about for us, and we're going to get into this a little bit later on, as an industry, we actually import quite a bit from China. We do, and we import from India. And so this is going to have an impact on the supplier side. But again, we're going to talk. There's a lot more to it than just product. But before we do that, Dan, do you just want to kind of run through how tariffs work and also the whole concept of reciprocity? Because okay, so that's what's
So
happened.
that's okay. So you've got a trade imbalance, right? So
Yeah.
that means that you would expect that our trade imbalance with China or India or one of these industrial nations that push stuff out, you would expect us to buy more from them than they buy from us. That would be the trade imbalance. Well, the administration doesn't like that. That's one thing. But beyond that is, do they tariff us, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so what, meaning, it's basically a tax, right? So if they tax us 20%, then what the administration said basically is that they are going to do a reciprocal tariff, but only do it for half. The question is the math, right? And so depending on which news outlet you listen to,
Hmm.
the math can be kind of wonky. So, for example, Europe, who is, our trading allies, right? Um, and a lot of other countries in the world don't necessarily tax income the way that we do, but they tax consumption. This
Hmm.
is why the US is one of the strongest economies in the world because we don't tax consumption. Yeah, the states have sales tax, but if you go to, Britain or, Ireland or
Hey, I was just in China and there was a 10% consumption tax. I
so
remember,
they,
like,
they, they
yeah,
call it a value added tax, a VAT tax,
yeah,
that, if you
yep.
heard that. So in Europe, it can be as much as 20%. So, okay, I sell a Ford automobile into there, and there's a 20% VAT tax, right? But
Hmm.
China also sends it into Europe, and there's also a 20% VAT tax. So the question is, are these tariffs or are these their way of taxing people, right? I
Hmm.
personally think that you don't tax, consumption, but if you remember Forbes, he was out, Steve Forbes, he wanted to do a flat tax, he wanted to do a consumption tax, that kind of thing. I, we are the strongest consumers in the world. And just because we don't have any money, it doesn't mean that we still won't consume. We still have credit
as
cards and
as
everything
proven by most
by your wife. So,
right.
but that's the way that it works, right? And so what the administration is saying is, hey, man, you guys are not being fair to us, right? So you tax us on, your goods. We're going to tax you on when you bring goods into us. Now, there are some interesting plays on this. I get it with China. Absolutely. They don't play fair
And haven't for many, many
and
years.
haven't for many years. But like Bangladesh can't feed their population and we're going to tariff them. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, you could listen, maybe you could be cynical and say, okay, well, where are the Bangladesh tariffs going? Probably to the wealthy ruling class while they let all of their folks starve. I don't know what the answer is. But at the end of the day, does everybody deserve this? And are we starting a trade war? Because that's why the markets are erupting the way that they are, because they feel like we're going to start this trade war. Okay, so let's see. That is the
Well, there's a couple things I want to add, which is number one, this whole idea of reciprocity, right?
yeah.
The reality of it is that, the strategy here is that we create a much more, I guess, a much more positive trade, relationship with all these other countries, and the whole idea of reciprocity is that, if our trading partners move or reduce their tariffs, then the U.S. will lower their tariff in response. However, there's also this whole idea of escalation, meaning that if you look into actual, like, his announcement and stuff like that, if they go up, well, then, the United States will go up as well. Like, he has the authority to hike rates. And so that gets into the whole idea of this idea of a trade war. Yeah,
But it's tit for tat, right?
it
So
is absolutely tit for tat.
it's tit
Exactly
for
right.
tat. And whether you believe this or not, because there's some truth to this, right? That we are not being treated properly and that we should be. But here's the thing, right? It If you just say, okay, we are the consumers of the world, and you may smack me for this because I know you're from a manufacturing town way back when, maybe that train has sailed, right? Do we want to get back people who, are embroiderers, sew fabric and things like that? Do we want to get those people back in our country manufacturing things? Or are we better leaving it to Vietnam and China and whatnot, right?
You're 100% that we're not going to agree on this one because, listen, I am not a fan of globalism.
Mhm.
Never have been. I don't think we benefit as a country. If you're the number one country, and people listening can be like, how pompous, we're not number one. Okay, doesn't really matter. If you are
You're the number one
you're
consumer.
you're
No
the number one
question.
consumer,
Yep.
and then you have this idea of globalism, which you're gonna, why would you wallow out your middle class to offload that to other countries so that you can consume something at a little bit less? But now of course it builds up these third world, second world countries, but it doesn't build up our country. Like when we have folks who are, listen, I don't know who our listeners, I mean, I don't know where our listeners live. Obviously, I know that most are, in these metropolitan areas, but just take a look around the small towns of the United States. And I'm not getting political here. This is just reality.
Mhm.
These towns have been wallowed out. And it
Yep.
absolutely has, what it has done is it has created a greater gap between the haves and the have-nots. And I don't know that, for me personally, I don't agree that it should be going to other countries. I think we should be focused on us first. And I'm not some populist, yada yada yada.
No, no,
I'm just simply making the point
but
that,
but
hey,
does all manufacturing need to come back? Does the seamstress need to come back? Does car manufacturing? Absolutely. That's a high paying job, highly skilled
well,
job.
not only that, like I think about our own security as a country. We need to be
That's
able to produce, right?
We need the chips over here, right? Because
Right.
absolutely
Exactly.
security.
So
But
in
does
any case,
all manufacturing need to come back on shore? I just don't, if, you know, it's funny because I'm from Jersey, right? And in Jersey, we have this little
No, no,
law,
no. You're from Florida.
right? But I was from Jersey. We have this law. It's the stupidest law ever. In New Jersey, you can't pump your own gas. You know what the
Oh
origin
yeah,
of that of
yeah.
that?
To create a job.
To create jobs. Go ask
Mm-hmm.
any gas station owner if they can hire people for that job and how difficult
Mm-hmm.
it is. They don't
Mm-hmm.
want it, right? So if you bring over low-paying jobs back to the US, does that solve for what you're talking about? I'll give you high-tech automobiles. The administration was talking about, I heard one of the talking heads over the weekend, which I thought was really interesting, is no, we're not going to build factories that build cars. We're going to build factories with robots that build cars, and our people are going to be the robot operators, the
Right.
engineers. And
Right.
that's a pretty cool concept, right?
Well, it is. And I mean, ultimately, we look at why are these tariffs coming in place? Number one is that it does need to be fair, right? I mean, listen, this is not something that just happened in the last 2 years. It hasn't even been in the last 10 years. This has been going on for many, many, many years. And it's getting to a point that we are getting kind of the short end of the stick. And for me personally, I think it's not been a great thing for our country because the middle class has been walled out. I don't know that we have full self-reliance as a country to produce. Like if there was a major conflict that exploded, like could we really produce everything we needed to protect the country? I don't know. This is not a political conversation. I
Certainly
just
is getting there.
Yeah, I know. so, so we need
All
to bring it back to,
right, let's get
there.
there.
Yeah. So that's how they all work. That's the whole idea of reciprocity. Let's talk about impact on our industry because this is the biggest part. Okay. So let's talk about the easy targets first. I'll start with that and then I'm going to transition to you because I want to talk about demand as well. Okay. So the first thing is that there absolutely will be an impact on chemical costs. Now, Dan's going to say this and I'm going to say this as well, which is 9% of your P&L. If you're doing things right, it's 9%. If you're in pest control, I'm sorry, if you're in lawn, it might be more like around 11, maybe 12 or whatever. But a
Well,
very
no,
small,
it could go as 15 and it could go as low as 5, depending on,
yeah.
but
How
it's
you
not
split
a
that out?
huge piece of your,
But you think about it, chemicals affect it. Glyphosate, right? Roundup, that's a big deal. I mean, that's almost exclusively produced in China. You look at some of these other like pyrethroids, those types of things. That's going to be India. That's going to be China. And so these main active ingredients that we have, the vast majority of them are produced in China or India. When you look at like I'm going to link this up. There's a whole blog about chemical imports and where all the chemicals are coming from. Listen, when you're looking at 34% tariff and the vast majority of chemicals are produced, at least the active ingredient in China, there will be an impact on your cost. There will be. Now, is
but
it
it's
going to be
not going to be
massive?
that 34% because it's
Right.
only a part of it. But I will tell you that in preparing for this talk, the research that you did, I was floored by all of the chemicals,
Hmm.
the active ingredients that come from overseas.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Most people don't know that, right? I mean, listen,
I didn't know.
as I was digging into it, I was like, oh, I knew that I just didn't realize it was this much, right?
Yeah.
Um, so there's the whole thing of your product, right? Your product absolutely is going to go up, right? I think about in our own business, we are big consumers of bifenthrin and cypermethrin, actually. That is all China and India, every bit of it. And so, either the products are going to have to change to come from active ingredients, are going to have to come from other countries, which is highly unlikely, or two, there is going to be an impact and it's going to be pretty quick because it's not
Well, they're
like
going to
unless
be
you,
tariffed here, but let me ask you a question. You're more closer to this than I am.
okay,
When you bring over bifenthrin, that's the active ingredient, but it's formulated here with inert ingredients, right? So
it
what
is.
percentage of what you buy? So if I have a 34% tariff, but only a quarter of it is from the imported bifenthrin, then you're at what, 8.5%.
Maybe,
Okay.
and I'm sure that's depending on the manufacturer and what product we're talking about. It's going to have a different play no matter what. My guess is that either it's going to have to be sourced from a different country, or two, there's going to be some absorption on the vendors, which I mean, I don't know how much they're going to pass along, but my guess is that the vendors are going to absorb some, we're going to absorb some, and then the customer is going to absorb some, and
But I,
so.
Yeah, I mean, as far as sourcing it from another country, if this is the new norm, they're going to be tariffed there too. So where does it go?
Hmm.
It's got to be sourced from within here. That's it.
It does.
The
It
only
does.
way to get around this if this is the new norm, right?
Correct.
So,
And listen, who knows, right? I mean, if it turns out that this goes the way that the administration's wanting it to go, which means they're going to renegotiate, this could be a huge thing for us, right? I mean, our product costs could go down. We don't know, right? Okay, so there's chemical, which I say that because I mean I want to get out in front of that because that's going to be the obvious and probably the most quickest um, increase that you're going to see. There's also vehicles, right? I mean, you look, that's a big one. We use a lot of vehicles, and there is, I think I have, I think you actually put this one up where you talked about what Bank of America. You want to talk about vehicles real
yeah,
quick, and then
yeah.
we're gonna.
So let's just kind of talk about the three things though that just put them in categories. We're going to talk about operating costs, which are chemicals, and other, rat bait stations,
Mhm.
anything that your cost of goods sold. We're going to talk about capital expenditure for the most part will be your vehicles, and then we'll talk about demand. So let's get there. And so let's talk about vehicles. So Bank of America estimates new vehicle prices, which currently run an average of about $48,000. Now, this is not for pickup trucks. This is something that I picked up on one of the news wires. Could it increase as much as $10,000 if automakers pass the tariffs on to impacted vehicles and full on to consumers? Think about that. We have 4-year leases. We're going to increase the cost of our truck by $2,500. I'd be more worried about insurance costs than that
Mhm.
$2,500 a year, right?
Right.
So this is the same thing like when the inflation argument went out and people were like, oh my God, gas has gone up to $5 a gallon. Well, gas is 2% of your P&L. So if it doubles, right? It's less than 2%, right? But if
Well,
it doubles, it's not going to have a major impact. What will is labor, and we'll talk about that in a few, right?
I was going to say, the reality of it is this: is that in our businesses, you look at chemical. Okay, so that's 9%. Like you said, 2,500 on a vehicle. Again, I'm not saying that's small potatoes because it is an increase, but looking at the big picture, like how many vehicles are you buying per year? How much of an impact that's really going to have. Where it's really going to hurt, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, is going to be customer demand, because while that may not be a big expense for the business, if I'm Mr. Donnie Shelton and I'm just your standard run of the mill guy, like I've got my normal 9 to 5 and all of a sudden,
No airplane, no
oh, stop
fancy
it.
car,
I can't go
Mr.
out and buy a
Mr.
vehicle and I'm paying more for gas, I'm paying more for clothes, I'm paying more for all of these other things. It's a zero-sum game. My paycheck's only going to go so far. And the question is, what's the elasticity of pest control?
Well,
What
it
is it
gets
of
it
lawn
gets
care?
it
You know what I
gets
mean?
worse because there's this thing called the wealth effect on people's 401k, whether it's perceived or their investment accounts, whether it's perceived or not perceived. You've just wiped out $5.5 trillion of market value over the last 2 days, although
Mhm.
looks like today's we're kind of settling out a little bit. But you wipe that out. If you looked at your 401k last Tuesday and then you looked at it this morning, you would just about fall on the floor, right? And so we do know that markets tend to recover, and they always do.
It will.
But,
It
but
will.
there is this wealth effect of, when the market's, at the top of its game and everybody's invested, yeah, maybe I'll go on that vacation and
Right.
whatnot. But
Hmm.
but and the thing that I worry about, this is kind of interesting, and I'd love to get Rollins' take on this, but pest control used to be a necessary service, but with the advent of door to door and the proliferation of door to door, it's become a luxury service for many, right? And, we did the Fox deal with Rollins. That worked great. Well, they announced this deal with Saela on Wednesday,
Hmm.
right when all of this happened.
Hmm.
It'll be really interesting to see the attrition on door to door because door to door is more of a luxury than a
Well,
necessity.
I think the core market is probably still there. Now, listen, I'm saying this with no data,
Yep.
but I agree with you. I think the folks who did it is kind of a when they, when folks when you brought it, because what door to door does is it opens up a bigger part of the market, and
Absolutely.
my guess is that that new opening market is going to take a bigger hit than the core market because there's always going to be a percentage of the population that understands the value and is going to want to protect their investment. And there's going to be others who don't. They kind of view it as like, oh yeah, everything's good and I'm taking care of the house, but I don't really, if push comes to shove, I'll cancel that service. And so you're right. I mean, it will be a great, not a, it would be a great question to know the answer to. What's the impact? And it really, I think you're right. It comes down to who's the buyer. So when I look at like if I'm a well, not if I mean, for me personally, what I'm more concerned about is demand than I am
Mhm.
about my chemicals going up a few dollars and me paying a little bit more for trucks. Not that I listen, and if the vendors are listening to this and saying, "Whoo, we can go," no, no, but I am absolutely saying like that to me is a much bigger threat to our business and certainly growth is demand because listen, I don't know. Listen, I have been listening to some of our peer groups and a lot of folks in the industry, and the first 2 months of this year was pretty brutal for a lot of folks, especially in terms of cancels. Not all. I don't know what you as far as pest
No, we're
industry.
hearing the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, now for us personally, like March, we were just, I mean, we had a huge March, just one of the biggest marches we ever had in the history of the company. However, that was not the case at the beginning of the year, and so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out psychologically as well financially. Because it's really what it's about for us is what is our consumer experiencing, and are they willing and able to not only afford our services but purchase them as well. So okay, let's talk a little bit about what happens with potential outcomes before we get into because there's another piece of this that I want to get into.
The inflation and the wage inflation that
Yeah,
can
yeah.
continue.
So the
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
positive scenarios is that countries lower their barriers and then we reciprocate, right? We have better trade deals. There's going to be strong U.S. manufacturing. The economy is going to blow up, right? And it's going to be great for all. That is absolutely one of the scenarios that can happen, which I think is what the administration is obviously hoping for. There's that
It's
side.
not gonna, it'll happen with smaller trading partners, but you start trying to push China around, they're just gonna push back, right? They're not gonna fall
I
in.
think I think they're going to negotiate. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm
I
overly.
hope you're right.
I think they will.
I just think that it shows total weakness on their part to acquiesce in any way. And they're not
Yeah.
about weakness.
Yeah, the reality of it is like they're so tied to our economy that it's like, are they going to just go down this road with us, or are they going to like say, okay, let's because there's still a win that they could do. They could be like, well, we're going to negotiate this out for the benefit of both economies. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Maybe you're right. Who knows? Okay, so then there's the negative scenario. The negative scenario is that these tariffs turn into inflation, right? Meaning that these costs get passed along to the consumer, and now all of a sudden the consumer needs to make more income. And since they need to make more income, now we have a big issue. When I see a big issue, I mean in our industry, because, you know, chemical, fuel, trucks, those things don't get me concerned. My payroll, which is 50%, and you start talking about changing percentages on that, now I get really concerned. Right. I
Yep.
mean, and we just went through this, what, like 3 years ago, where we were having to like increase, when inflation took off and our wages were too low and we couldn't attract people to the industry. And it was like we were having to run wages up really, really quick, which creates problems in your company because if you got certain people hired in at a certain wage, and wages are taken off and now you're bringing in folks making more than they're making, it's almost like you have to level everyone up. And so that's a huge concern for me is the negative
So the
scenario.
price increases seem to work at that point, although we definitely had some attrition. Can we do that again?
No, I don't think so,
Yeah.
because the reality of it is that what's driving it's not the costs are going up, and it's not like if the economy is going to grow, like the worst case scenario would be costs are going up, the economy flatlines, and then all of a sudden it's like, man, we've got big inflation, and so our demand's going to be down, our costs are going to be up. That to me is not the best scenario, but it could happen, right? It is a potential outcome, and it's one that you need to think about as an owner. Um, and then you want to talk through the hybrid, like what could potentially happen here, Dan?
Yeah,
So there's
so
positive and negative. Let's talk about what might happen in the middle
yeah,
of it.
so the hybrid that I was looking at is, while we're negotiating with all of these other countries, our economy sputters, but we're able to come out the other end and reach some sort of compromise. And so, it's funny when I wrote this, it was before, it was Saturday before all the talking head shows yesterday. And I think one of the talking heads from the administration said, "Hey, no pain, no gain," you
Hmm.
know, and that works in the gym, but I don't know that it works with my with my wallet, like or my investment account. Like nobody wants to hear that. No
Right.
matter who you voted for, nobody wants to hear that I'm taking your money, you know.
Well, listen, as we're recording this right now, there's a big breaking news saying, well, this whole 90-day pause is all fake news. The White House
That's
is
I
not.
just saw that too. So
Isn't that
so all
hilarious?
right. So I wake up this morning and the Dow futures were down, I don't know, 1,400 points. Then they flipped to about once the market opened, they flipped to about 600 up. So that's
I know.
$2,000 or 2,000 point swing. And
I
now
know.
I have CNBC up on my wall here, and it says that it's all fake news.
It's all fake news, and now it's down 160 points
Yeah,
again. So who knows?
well,
But point is, and coming back to what you're
volatility
saying,
huge.
it's huge volatility. It's all emotion. It's all fear, right? I do think. Listen, I think at the end of the day, it's not going to be easy to renegotiate these trade agreements, and it's been tried before and it's failed. And I do believe that it is going to be some pain before there's gain. And I think in the end, I think there's going to be a better solution out for the U.S. economy. The question is how much pain are we going to have to go through in order to get there? So let's bring this back to now what? I think we've talked a little bit about what tariffs are, what happened, what are the potential outcomes. Let's talk a little bit about, now what? Like, looking at these different scenarios, what do you do as a business? Now, you put some notes to my notes, and number one is I couldn't agree more. So I'm going to let you take this one because it's a fantastic,
So
fantastic point.
here's the deal. Anytime you have a jolt, COVID, massive recession in 2008, 2009. This, which, COVID, you couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. This you can. You
Right.
definitely can, right? But when you have a jolt, cash is king. So make sure that you collect your accounts receivable and preserve any credit lines because and make sure that you're in touch with your bank because I don't know if you remember in 2008 and 2009 banks were just canceling people and not even telling them,
I
right?
know.
So
Yeah.
make sure that you have your credit lines in place. The other thing that I put is heroes are made when times are tough. If you've got cash, take care of your vendors. Make sure they get paid. Don't try to string them out
Yeah.
because when things turn around, people remember
Yeah.
that. If
Yeah.
you have the ability to take care of your vendors, do it and do it right,
Right. Right.
especially your accountants.
Yep. Yep. Well, that's a little self-serving. No, I will
Yeah,
tell
we
you.
ACH everyone, so it
Yeah,
doesn't.
yeah. So he is correct, though. I mean, ultimately, people do remember and stay within your terms. At the end of the day, look, I personally think, it's whenever the the water runs out, you see who's real and who's not. And to your point, cash is king. This is not a time for me personally that I would be taking a lot of risks. There's been times in the business that I've been, I've made some pretty risky moves, and if it didn't work out, it was going to really hurt us. I would not. Well, I'm not doing that this year. I'm just not. It's way too volatile. I don't know how things are going to play out. I'm still going to market. Still, the main thing I would say, actionable, is really shore up any customer service issues you got. Really make sure that you're emphasizing the value that you're bringing to your consumer. Because listen, consumer sentiment doesn't have to be real. Perception is reality. What are
Mhm.
you hearing on the news right now all the time, 24/7 about these tariffs? They're terrible. The economy's tanking. This is gonna. We're gonna. And listen, if the perception is that with your consumer, I can tell you right now, the very first time that you screw up, The very first, I mean, one little thing is you get to give them a reason. You just don't want to go there, and you want to really watch that cancel rate and get in front of it. Obviously, um, you don't want to be looking at your cancel rate after the fact and being like, "Oh my gosh, why are we running 3% a month or something like that?" So just get in front of that. Be proactive with your customers, making sure that any kind of customer service training you can do, any kind of incentives that you can do. Get creative with someone who calls in the cancels. Can you reduce pricing, like those types of things. Be thinking that through, because I think that's really, really important. The other thing I would say, if you can do this, you may not be in a position to do this, is call your vendor. Think about, could I stock up? Is there a reason to stock up? Sometimes I know that we don't really do this anymore, but years ago it used to be that, if you bought Termidor in the spring and you bought like freaking pallets of it, you'd get these big discounts and,
Mhm.
terms and those types of things. And listen, I don't know what their supply chain looks like. They may not want to do that. Who knows? Maybe they're trying to, ride this thing out, but my point is to you
Well,
as a
that's an
business owner,
interesting point. Like what happens
right,
to used car prices that that the owners start gouging because they're
right.
you know,
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of, I mean, I'm not a distributor. I know if I were a distributor, I'd want to kind of pull back a little bit. I'd want to hold what I got to try to ride out the wave to make sure, because I wouldn't want to be making more purchases at a higher price if I
yeah.
didn't have to. And so, okay, so there's cash, there's taking care of your customers, there's taking care of Dan because he wants to get paid, and then there's probably the most important part, which I would say is, if what happens if inflation goes crazy and credit dries up, and that's going to be your team, right? Do you want
Take
to talk a
care
little
of
bit about
your
that? Because I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit about it too, but some
Yeah,
things.
so I kind of put that one down. Take care of your employees. And this is kind of one that you've got to see where this goes. If we go into inflationary or recessionary times and demand pulls back a little, make sure that you know who your A players are and you take care of them. And if you have to
Mhm.
trim your C and D players, do it. But you need to make sure that you take care of your team because we always come out of it. And when we do, that builds loyalty. People remember what other people do when times are tough, right? It's
Right,
easy for me to give you a raise when times are good and we're
right.
cranking. It's not easy for me to take care of you when things are a little more murky.
Yeah. Well, we're getting to the end here, and I want to close with one thought. This is something I've said for years, and I think it's probably the most critical point, not because I'm saying it, just because I've just seen it so many years, year after year after year. And that is this principle: nothing drives innovation like desperation. And I we were growing in the early years, I used to say that all the time. It's like, we need to innovate. We need to listen, if this is really going to go down the way it is, now's the time to be looking at technology. Like, my question to you as an owner, and it's really a challenge, is like, how do we absorb this cost and not screw the consumer and not screw our team? Are there efficiencies that we can put into the business that absorbs this, but keeps everyone else kind of moving where they need to go? Ultimately, we're playing one game, right? It's the game of value. And, us as a business, when you get to times like this, it's a great time to step back from your business and say, hey, are there efficiencies that we can gain now that I don't have to pass this along? Because ultimately, what's going to happen is that other companies are going to figure it out, and they're going to have better pricing, they're going to have better service, and you're going to get left in the dust. And so these are times when it's really good to step back from your business, take a good look, and look for ways that you can innovate, right? I mean, we talk about AI a lot. We, at least on the Triangle side, we're well into that.
Yeah.
I mean, so my point is that, I would, we talk about an actionable to do, is I certainly would step back from my business and say, hey, look, is there a way I can eliminate the need to hire folks? Is there a way that I can eliminate, price increases if my chemical does go up? If I do have to absorb this with the truck, if we're in this for the long term for the rest of 2025, maybe into 26, how can I transfer my business that I'm getting more per dollar, of revenue back to the bottom line? And so, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure anything else to add there, Dan, before we finish out?
Well, I think that one of the things that we did list here and we didn't discuss is lean on your trade organizations, lean on
Mhm.
NPMA, get information that they're talking about, rise,
Right.
lean on them. I think, we're much stronger together.
Right.
And so definitely you want to lean on the national and state trade organizations.
Right. And I'm just sitting here, I was having fun with Dan. I was on our document. But the other point I was going to make is, stay tuned to this podcast. Listen, as we get new data and as we get, ideas and we hear what folks are doing, again, we really need to wait and see how this is going to play out. This could be very, very short term. And, in a month, we're not even talking about it. I don't think that's
The
going to be
reason
the
I'm
case.
smiling is we read off of a Google document, and I just noticed that the font from "Listen to this podcast" from it was 11 to 29. It says, "Listen to this podcast for updates and strategies."
Well, listen, listen, if you're a listener to this podcast, it already says a lot about you as an owner. I would say, for our listeners, I promise that, listen, as I get more data, as I learn, and I'm sure as Dan does as well, we're certainly going to pass that along to you. It's the whole idea behind this podcast is that, how do we grow our businesses? How do we, win despite challenges? Because listen, at the end of the day, I can't change those tariffs. All I can do is adapt to it as what it's going to be. And it will level out, and we will certainly get through it. It's just, how do we be wise about it in the meantime? So with that, Dad, anything else to add?
I think that's it. Just strap in and
Yeah, here we go.
where the
That's what I
ride
said.
goes.
Yeah.
It's going
Yeah.
to be pretty wild.
Okay, now listen. This podcast, we had a lot of research. We will, if you get a chance, I would highly recommend that you take a look at this outline that we used. There's a lot of links to other articles that we used as far as the data. That's all available on our podcast website, pmpindustryinsider.com. Just take a look under show notes. And of course, we always appreciate any ratings and reviews that you can give us, unless they're negative. And with that, we ask that you pass it on to Dan. We're going to sign off. We'll see you all next time, hopefully with the market way in the green and on the backside of this. So with that, I'm taking off. We'll see you all. Take care.
See ya.
Bye now.
Bye.